Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. Well, this week we're celebrating our second anniversary of bringing you captivating conversations with leaders in today's healthcare landscape. So for this episode, rather than offering another full-length interview, we're going to play some excerpts from 5 of our favorite shows from the past 2 years. And most of the selections were based on response from our listeners. So let's go ahead and get started. In the leadoff position, we have Dr. Giovanni Piedemonte, who grew up in a working-class family in Italy and by sheer determination got himself into medical school in Rome. He made some great connections and was on track for a promising career in surgery, but he turned his back on that plan. Now he's vice president for research at Tulane University Medical Center in New Orleans and one of the most respected pediatricians in the world. So let's hear him tell the story. You made a decision to proceed with higher education. Now, was that the point where you had made the decision that you were going to go to medical school right after high school?
Look, that is one of the most mysterious parts of the story because I had no interest in medicine whatsoever. What happened was that I was the valedictorian. My father sent me to not only to a boarding school. I guess he didn't trust me very much. So not only sent me to a boarding school, but he sent me to a Catholic boarding school run by priests. And it was a very, very, very hard, very tough school. And what can I say? I love to learn. I love to study, and
there were high academic expectations, and it sounds like you just fit right in. Is that right?
Yeah, but not because I really wanted. Just actually, as a matter of fact, the only thing I really cared about was soccer, and I became actually a professional soccer player. In that they were paying me. That was really the only thing I was interested in. But in the meantime, I was learning. And
you and Pavarotti were both failed soccer players. You know.
Well, I was a little bit thinner than him, but and probably better at soccer, not at singing. But what happens really is that at least in the Italy of the 70s, 80s, if you were very good in school and you had talent in school, you had only 3 options. The first option was to become a lawyer. And at the time, I was pretty convinced that to be a good lawyer, you have to be a very good liar. And occasionally, I still believe that. But now I have to change my mind because at least one of my daughters probably is going to become a lawyer. And so I've never been very good at lying. Second, engineering. And I was very, very good at anything I had to do with literature, art, classics, and so on. So I hated mathematics with a vengeance. And so I was not very attracted by things that will be fundamentally mathematical. The last option by default was medicine. And so that's what, it was literally and exclusively a decision by default.
So a process of elimination. That's really
a process of elimination. I mean, I had those 3 options. All the others, business school is not considered as a particular element or the three top aspiration for anybody who's good in school, at least at the time. And so I had to pick among those three, and I picked the one that was the least adversity against.
Yeah. Well, now that's opens up an interesting area of conversation, I think, and that is certainly the study of medicine is not. I don't think anybody would consider it to be highly mathematical from the engineering or architectural standpoint of something or of that nature, but still, it's very factual.
Yeah.
Discipline as opposed to the letters, if you will, literature and the arts and that sort of thing.
But there is a lot of truth in when people say that medicine is an art and other science. I continue romantically to believe that.
Yeah. But so once you were there, did you feel comfortable? Did you feel like you'd made the right decision early on, or did you wonder from time to time? Okay. So
absolutely. It's either philosophy or religion. And I think that somebody up there has been driving me in the most important decisions in my life. And, I fell into medicine really without thinking about it too much. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions in my life. And the same thing happened when totally serendipitously I got into pediatrics. I had absolutely nothing to do with pediatrics. I was supposed to become a surgeon. And in fact, in Italy, it's not very easy to get into surgical, general surgery residencies. And I got into it. And I really wanted, I had absolutely no interest outside of surgery. I felt that was my life. The problem is, in order to graduate as an MD, you have to prepare a thesis. And I did prepare a thesis. I worked a lot, day and night on it. And I also spent a substantial amount of money, which I didn't have at the time, to prepare a very exhaustive photographic documentation of the staplers that we had just received from the United States for abdominal surgery. And my mentor at the time told me that he really loved the work, and he asked me to provide him with a separate set of pictures, which I really didn't understand why I needed a separate set of pictures, but you don't say no to your mentor. And so I spent an additional amount of money, corresponding approximately to the money I needed to eat for a month.
My goodness.
To get them the pictures, and he actually was in a hurry to get them. And then I forgot about it. I graduated as an MD. I accessed residency in surgery. But then I was spending lots of nights in the OR to watch surgeries. And
so you were already in your surgery residency at this point?
Yeah, pretty much. There is a couple of months that between the end of med school and entrance into the internship, and I was in that phase. I was waiting formal official beginning of the internship, but I was still spending a lot of time in the OR.
Okay.
And nothing. I was one morning been all night in the OR, and I decided to rest a little bit in the doctor lounge, and there were a bunch of journals on the table there, and I started going through the pages of one, and serendipitously, despite I was half asleep, I noticed that there were pictures that were very familiar to me. And so I found out the reason why my mentor wanted a new set of pictures, which was that he published a paper. The paper was identical to my thesis, and the pictures were the pictures that I had to pay, despite he was coming from one of the richest families in Rome. And I didn't take it very well. So that day I told them in plain Italian what I thought about them, and that was the official end of my future career in surgery. And across the street was the pediatric clinic. My professor of pediatrics was very fond of me. He really loved my work, and that promised me that if I would enter the residency in pediatrics, that he would, at a certain point, send me to the United States, which happened 2 years later. And
that is an incredible story. Now, and I want to stop you there just a moment for some more details, if you will. Now, I think anybody could understand the feeling of realizing that you've been plagiarized. And when you confronted this very lofty professor, did you understand at that time, in the midst of your anger, that you were probably closing a door
absolutely.
you'd never be able to reopen? Yeah, and never thought twice about it, right?
I will not do it today, probably, but at the time I was in my 20s, and
Sure.
and I still believed in that things should be done ethically. I still do, but I will control my reactions. But at the time, basically, the simple concept. He put the 8 names on that paper, but he didn't put the name of the one that actually wrote it. And and so basically, it's I think it's also a metaphor what happened to me, because again, the academic system at the time, and in my opinion still today in Italy, was extremely corrupted. Yeah. And I was nobody coming from the South, and I was not the son of a big professor. My family was not involved in politics, so I didn't have any relevant feature to make a strong academic career in Italy, because those are the only elements that are important. And so basically, he thought that probably that paper was wasted on me, and he found a better use to. But I felt a little different, and in turn, basically, he gave me a great present in that probably I will not be in the United States today if he wouldn't have done something so dirty.
Anyone who has ever applied to medical school knows that all schools claim to be looking for candidates with a wide breadth of knowledge and experience. Well, this next clip is the story of one applicant that played just what might be the broad experience trump card. She is Dr. Naran Alajba, a pediatrician from Silverdale, Washington, who credits baton twirling with getting her into medical school. I think it's a great story, so let's hear what she has to say. Well, it sounds like undergraduate school was not much of a challenge for you. You graduated with honors, and then back to Washington for medical school. How did you make that choice?
Well, that's a great story. That's the only place I got in, and I was the last person to get into my class. I was notified, so I was put on the wait list. And back then, there was this great dean of admissions, Dr. Werner Sampson is his name. And he was famous for kind of hammering at the students when we would go and meet with him to find out why we didn't get in. So I remember I called and they said, well, you're on the what's called the unranked wait list. And so they had 20 that were ranked. And then they had this pile of 20 kind of just in case. And so they said, Dr. Sampson meets with students. Do you want to make an appointment? I said, okay. I didn't really even know what I was doing. So I said, all right. So that summer, this would have been the summer of 95, I was working actually at the health district as a health educator. I hadn't gotten into medical school. And I went to meet with him and he sort of looked at me and said, well, just try again next year. You don't really have anything that stands out. He also told me that he didn't know how my dad could be successful as a pediatric endocrinologist in a small town. and he's so great. He's a straight shooter. I got to know him very well, obviously, through the years. So I left and I thought, I had done this sport in growing up, baton twirling, and I had been on a national and even world level. There's still tapes that keep showing up on YouTube here and there. I don't have copies of these things, but people will post them because they have old videotapes and such.
I'm going to Google it.
Yeah, you might want to Google it. And so I was irritated with this guy. I thought, he really didn't know anything about me. And I mentioned the baton twirling, and he said, well, it's not like playing basketball or the violin. God. So true to my form, which is kind of the theme of my life, I wrote him a letter about kind of what I thought of him. It was a nice letter. He says I called him stupid. I definitely did not call him stupid. But I said, you don't know anything about this sport. Here's a videotape. This is back then when we had VHS tapes. I said, here's the tape of my last world competition. I'm sure you will find it equally as challenging as basketball or the violin. And I kind of told my dad I had done this, and he said, oh my gosh, go to the post office, go get that letter. You can't do that. You can't send it. And I thought, you know what? I'm a person. He's a person. I'm going to tell him kind of what I thought. And I started it with, I was disappointed with our meeting, and here's a chance to learn something. And so I got a call about a month later, and I got in. So I called. I was so excited. And the lady on the phone said, oh, you're the baton twirler. Oh my gosh, everybody's seen your tape. We love it. It's amazing. And I said, oh, wow. And I said, did Dr. Sampson see it? She said, oh, he definitely saw it. He gave it back to me when I graduated. And he told me, obviously he used to tease me that I'll always take a baton twirler from now on. But I think he kind of liked that sort of approach where I said, hey, wait a second, buddy. I don't think you gave me a chance. And here's something I think I can teach you.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition? Teach? Quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. If you're a regular listener to RX for Success, you know I like to talk to people about the very beginnings of their life, even before they might have even known a medical career was in their future. Every story is truly unique, and none more so than Dr. Carla Rodering. She is a pulmonologist as well as a coach and mentor from Phoenix, Arizona area. Her origin story includes living in a boxcar in a railway yard for the first 7 years or so of her life. I never get tired of hearing this one.
I really didn't think about medicine ever in my growing up, in my childhood or my teenage years. I was a prairie girl. I grew up in a town of about 112 people on the prairies of North Dakota. Yeah. Most of them.
I'm guessing there was no doctor.
There was no doctor in town. The closest doctor was about 20 miles away. and you just drove and sat in the waiting room, and he just saw you in the order that you arrived, and that's how you got medical care. Oh, there's an entry in my baby book that my mother wrote that said, "The doctor stopped by today on his way home to clip Carla's tongue." So,
my goodness.
So apparently he had, his name was Dr. Martin. And apparently he'd stopped by. I actually grew up in an abandoned railroad car. And he apparently stopped by the railroad car, and I'm assuming that my tongue was attached to the floor of my mouth, and that he did that in the railroad car at the kitchen table.
Well, now that opens a lot of territory. So you actually literally had a kitchen table operation.
We did.
And do you mind sharing with us how the family wound up residing in a railroad car?
It was, my parents were young, and my father had gone with his family to this little town in North Dakota where they homesteaded, but my dad never did any farming. So he did things like set pins, at the bowling alley and got paid by the pin and those kinds of things. And when they were married, he went to work for the railroad, and there was this boxcar that somehow had been converted into a house, a home, a dwelling. And I'm not sure exactly how they got there, but I lived the first 6 years of my life in that boxcar with no running water in the middle of North Dakota. And I have these memories, people, I didn't know there was anything unusual about that. I thought that was just the way of the world. But I do remember that, North Dakota's cold and the winds blow. And I remember my uncles would come and wrap tar paper around the outside of this boxcar and then stack bales of hay to keep the wind from blowing through in the wintertime.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it felt pretty snug to me. I remember having to stand on the arm of the couch to step into the room that served as a bedroom where my parents slept, and then from their bed into a crib, which is where I slept until I was 6. So, yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it was a great way to live. I don't recall that as a time of hardship or any of that. It was a really loving, lovely place to live.
So many of the people I've interviewed have stories about succeeding in the face of what most of us would consider to be huge obstacles. Well, Dr. Marlene Wust-Smith has had a very successful career as a pediatrician in several different practice settings, but her story begins in New York City, where she was born to refugees from Castro's Cuba in the 1950s. As a child, she never heard English spoken until the day she started to school. Well, let's hear how that turned out. Talk about your beginnings. I know, or at least I think I know, you were born in New York City back in the 60s. Is that correct?
Yes, 1963.
And tell us about growing up in New York.
So my earliest memories are living with my father and grandparents, my paternal grandparents, up in Upper Harlem. My dad left Cuba, one of the earliest in his family to leave, upset with the revolution and Castro's takeover. Yes.
So he must have left under fairly challenging circumstances.
Yes, he was. His claim to fame was that he was on one of the last open or free flights out of Cuba before it became illegal to leave. And he didn't know whether he'd see any of his family again. They had a big party for him. He bought drinks for everyone on the plane on the way to Miami and was bad-mouthing Castro.
Yeah.
And then there was bad weather in Miami and they had to turn around and go back to Havana.
Oh, my goodness.
So he was afraid he was going to get arrested. But fortunately, he made it out on a plane the next day. But
indeed, it was fortunate.
It was. So my father is one of my inspirations, one of the hardest working men I have ever met. Never finished high school. Actually got emancipated at the age of 16 or 17 to open up his own bars in Havana, and was a minor, but was able to get adults. He's always been a wheeler and dealer and very successful, but without a formal education. And early on in my childhood, I remember him asking me from the time I could remember, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I always said that I wanted to be either a teacher. I loved children. I loved visiting anybody who had kids. I was the one that entertained babies. And he would shake his head and said, not a teacher. You can be a teacher, but you need to get an education. You like to spend a lot of money. You need to do something that will make you some more money than a teacher can make.
That's interesting advice.
It was. And in the end, I didn't go into medicine or pediatrics because of the money, but I'm very fortunate that he inculcated that thought in my head when I was very young. He thought that success meant being a lawyer, being a physician. My aunt, his older sister, was a chemist. So he valued education, and interestingly, education for women. He always said to me and to my younger cousins, you need to have an education so that you never have to depend on a man. And
so he was really ahead of his time.
He was. And from an era where that wasn't, practically speaking, you didn't see that, and you didn't see it in Cuba. So I'm
he was
very
a
blessed.
Really forward thinker, and indeed, you are fortunate.
So I think at the age of 7, it was when I first said I wanted to be a pediatrician, and I stuck with it. I didn't really understand too much about medicine at that time when I was very young. The doctors I would go to would be the emergency room. I don't know if he had insurance or didn't have insurance, but if I was sick or got hurt or needed something, I think that they primarily used emergency room care. My parents, my mom was very young when I was born, and they got divorced by the time I was 9 months old. So my dad was raising me along with his elderly parents while he worked all day. I stayed with them, and
that's kind of unusual. Usually it's the other way around, as you know.
Correct,
in
yes.
divided families.
So,
but it sounds like he did well.
He did very well, and I ended up getting raised by his sister, and so my aunt, who I will call my mom interchangeably. I have a very interesting family, but my dad decided when I was about 3.5, 4, that living in Harlem in New York City with elderly grandparents and his long working hours was not going to be conducive for my education. And so I went to live with his younger sister, who was married at the time that they decided that they would keep me full time. She was just pregnant with my younger cousin/sister. So I moved in with them when I was about 4 years old, initially in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then we moved to New Jersey, northern New Jersey, Fair Lawn, right outside of New York City. And I was able to go to kindergarten there in Fair Lawn. And interestingly enough, I did not speak nor hear a word of English until I started kindergarten.
Really?
Correct. I only spoke Spanish, and, Spanish TV was on in the household. And because my name is German, my grandfather was German, moved to Cuba, the kindergarten teacher did not know that I didn't speak any English. There was no such thing as ESL or English as a second language then. But by November, when my parents, my aunt and uncle, went for the first parent-teacher conference, they came to apologize that, perhaps I was not as fluent as or understanding as other children, and the teacher had no idea who they were talking about. She said, I have no Spanish-speaking children in this class.
So you have a gift for language, it sounds
I guess. I have vague memories of those days. I remember I would watch everybody else, and if you finished your assignment early, you could go play in the dress-up corner. the first one to finish the assignment would get the best costume or whatever, play in the kitchen or whatever the kids wanted. And I remember I would watch what everybody else was doing, finish what I needed to do so that I could get there early and put on the wedding dress or whatever it was that the kids wanted to play with. So
that sounds like a lot of fun.
It was.
So we'll close out our anniversary episode with yet another truly unique individual. Dr. Marta Ilueca was inspired to study medicine following the death of her sister at a very early age. She was an honors graduate of Cornell Medical University, and she later served on the faculty at Cornell for several years. From there, she went on to a research position in pharmaceuticals, and most recently, she was ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church. So, let's listen as she shares her thoughts about the place of spirituality in medicine.
I want to send this message to those who are listening to me. Vocation has two important components. One, it should feel some kind of unmet need in the world. But two, it should bring you joy. It has to bring you joy.
Well, it certainly sounds like you got yourself in exactly the right spot. And I think I understand exactly what you're saying. I've met a number of people who have retired from lengthy and successful careers in something very specialized, such as medicine or whatever, and yet they reinvent themselves, sometimes with something totally different, but sometimes something that is at least tangentially connected, as I think this is exactly what you're talking about. When I was in medical school, I had the great opportunity to go to lectures by the late, great Dr. Tinsley Harrison, and he would talk frequently about the priesthood of medicine. And that is something that is a real part of the experience if the practitioner is going to really get anything back from it, as I hope they will. And it sounds like that's exactly what you discovered.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. There's a myth out there, and I know that some of my colleagues believe in it, and I respect that, but we should no longer think that science and spirituality do not belong together, because, Randy, there is data now in many areas showing that there is a beneficial effect of religious or spiritual practices in healthcare. Not all of them is not perfect, but there's enough data saying we need to pay attention to this. We need to do more research. We need to perfect the research in this area, because this is not a crazy construct.
And in fact, you already have, I believe, done some published research, and it looks like, if I'm reading your data correctly, that you're continuing to be involved in research that has been able to truly make the connection in a scientifically examined environment about the connection between spirituality and pain relief.
Yes, and thank you for asking me that, because that's one of the things that I consider one of my most important focus right now. So as my graduation capstone thesis project at the Tufts program, I chose to investigate the potential role and use of prayer in the management of pain. So for my thesis, I did a systematic review of the medical literature on the use of prayer in the management of pain. And I describe, and this is already published, that there are certain kinds of prayers, Randy, that seem to be beneficial for people that are suffering or perceiving pain. And I also describe data where researchers have shown also the benefit of praying to God as opposed to praying to a generic entity. So this is really fascinating. So when I wrote my thesis and I had the findings in this paper, I discovered that there was one clinical need, which was that there were no clinical measures or scales to characterize the types of pain that people use when they are in pain. And what I did was I was very intentional in connecting with the researchers that had the most significant and pioneer research on this. So that led me to the project that I'm working on right now, in collaboration with Dr. Samantha Mines, who's a clinical psychologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And Dr. Mines' research had shown that the type of petitionary prayer, in other words, to be very simple, be careful what you ask for. Depending on how you pray, you may help your pain. You may help the way that you feel your pain, but also you may not help it. So Dr. Mines' work is really in the coping mechanism that results from the use of prayer. And we put our heads together between her pioneering research and the way that prayers are typified or characterized. And at the present time, we are doing a study on developing a scientifically validated scale or questionnaire that can be used in clinical research, or it can be used at the bedside. And out of that validation that should be happening within the next 6 months, by the way, we just completed recruitment for that study. I plan to create a bedside prayer tool. And I want to make it clear that this is for people who believe in prayer or meditation. This is not to be imposed on anybody who doesn't have that belief, and that's okay. But this tool should help people enhance their devotional practices. And who knows, if we can contribute even just a little bit to the way people perceive their pain, I think we will be doing a great service, and we will be creating the kind of language or currency that allows the pastoral workers to connect with the scientific world.
It's really fascinating, and I know it has to be profoundly gratifying to you. So congratulations on making this kind of progress. I could probably keep you on the line for hours and hours. I want to go ahead and close out the interview part of the program right now and get on to giving you the opportunity to speak from your heart and your soul. So I'm going to close my mic and just listen. And audience, here is Dr. Marta Ilioika giving us her prescriptions for success.
Thank you, Randy. And thank you again to those of you who are giving time of your busy lives to listen to us today. I have 3 general ideas about what a prescription for success is. And this is about yourself. The first one is really something that I learned very early in life from a song by Bobby B. He was a singer in the 60s. And the song said, "Be true to yourself, and you'll always be true to me." I think the first thing is credibility. I think it's really important to combine prudence with a sense of urgency in everything you do. To do your due diligence in whatever your circumstances are, and then act carefully and responsibly. Because I really believe that it is important to meet our goals with that sense of urgency, but to do it carefully and not be impulsive. The second point I would say is be humble. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt when you may be right or when you may be wrong. You see, every single person out there can teach us a life lesson. And this second point is about cultivating a willingness to learn from every circumstance. And the third point of this prescription for success would be dare to discover and nurture your spirit. Personal growth only happens when we realize that there is something bigger and better than our current version of ourselves. Give yourself permission to believe in a higher power, which some of us call God or simply the universe. Ours is an intelligent universe. See, whether or not you believe that such a higher intelligence created and organized this universe, that doesn't change the fact that we need to get on with the program. We need to respect the laws of life. We need to respect and honor the universal order. And then we can see wonderful things unfold in our lives. This last point is what I call the great experiment, which is be intentional in opening your minds and your heart to inspiration and creativity stemming from this higher power, and be prepared to be amazed.
Thank you so much for listening today. We'll be back next week with a new guest and another captivating story, as always. Remember, you can get more information about our guests as well as hear them face my rapid-fire questions at our Patreon site. While you're there, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks very much to Ryan Jones, who composes and performs our theme music. That's a wrap for now, but be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.